It's so terrific to be here, and thank you, Daniel, for everything you're doing here. What I want to talk about today is about perception and how limited we are in what we're seeing in the world. So, you know, we're built out of very small stuff, and we're embedded in a very large cosmos, but we're not particularly good at seeing reality, understanding reality, either of those scales, because instead we've evolved at this intermediate scale with, you know, mates and rabbits and apples and rivers and whatever, and that's where we perceive our reality. But the thing that I want to tell you about as a starting point is that we're not particularly good at perceiving reality even there. There's so much of the world we don't see. So take as an example the colors of our world. You open your eyes and there's all the colors. But in fact, what we're seeing, many of you probably know, is less than a 10 trillionth of the light that's out there. So you've got radio waves and microwaves and X-rays and gamma rays. This is all passing through your body, and it's totally invisible to you. You don't see it because you don't have specialized receptors to pick up on it. So you've got thousands of cell phone conversations passing right through you, and you don't see that. Now, it's not that this stuff is inherently unseeable. So snakes pick up on information in the infrared range, and honeybees pick up on information in the ultraviolet range. It's just that you can't see any of this, at least not yet. So what this leads to, I think, is this very counterintuitive starting point, which is that your reality is actually constrained by your biology. And so what's interesting is that when you look across the animal kingdom, you find that different animals are picking up on different parts of reality. So in the world of the blind and deaf tick, it just picks up on temperature and butyric acid. That's all it's picking up on. It's sensory apparatus. For the black ghost knifefish, it's picking up on perturbations in electrical fields. That's all it can see. For the blind echolocating bat, it's just picking up on air compression waves. And that's how it builds its world. And we have a word for this in science. For this part of the world that you're picking up on, it's called the umwelt, which is the German word for the surrounding world. And presumably, every animal thinks that its umwelt is the entire world out there. Because why would you stop to ever think that there's something beyond what you can sense? So let's do a quick consciousness raiser on this. So imagine that you are a bloodhound dog, and you've got this enormous snout with 200 million scent receptors in it. And your whole world is about smell, and you've got these wet nostrils to attract and trap scent molecules. You've got slits in the nostrils, take big nosefuls of air. You've got floppy ears to kick up scent. Everything is about smell for you. So one day, you stop in your tracks, and you look at your human master, and you think, what is it like to have the pitiful little nose of a human? Like, how could you not know that there's a cat 100 yards away, or that your best friend was on this spot 6 hours ago? Because we are trapped in our umwelt, we never stop to think about what our umwelt could be. And so my interest as a neuroscientist is to figure out how our technology and technology that we can build will expand our reality. So, as many of you surely know, we're quite good at marrying our technology to our biology. So there are hundreds of thousands of people walking around with artificial hearing and artificial vision. And the way this works is you take a little digital microphone, you slip an electrode strip into the inner ear, or you take a digital camera, you plug an electrode grid into the back of the eye. The interesting part is that as recently as about 30 years ago, a lot of people thought that these technologies would never work. And the reason is that these are speaking the language of Silicon Valley with zeros and ones, which is slightly different than the natural biological dialect that these normally come with. But it turns out it didn't matter. It turns out your brain can figure that out just fine. Now, how do we understand that? Well, the secret, of course, is that you're not directly hearing or seeing any of what's going on around here. Your brain is locked in silence and darkness, and all it has are these electrical and chemical signals, and that's all your brain has. But what brains are really good at doing is extracting patterns and eventually assigning meaning to that, and eventually building this, your full, rich cosmos, even though all you have are these different data cables coming into the darkness here. So the point I want to make is that your brain doesn't actually know, and it doesn't care where the information comes from. As long as the information gets there, your brain will figure out what to do with it. And this is a remarkable sort of general compute device, which says, okay, just give me whatever, and I will figure out how to optimally act on that. And so I call this the pH model of evolution. I don't want to get too technical, but pH stands for potato head. And the idea is that you just plug in whatever peripheral sensors you want, and the brain will figure out what to do with them and how to operate with them. So when you look across the animal kingdom, you find all kinds of weird peripheral sensors. You find, snakes have heat pits. That's how they pick up on the infrared. And the black ghost knifefish has electroreceptors all up and down its body. And the star-nosed mole has this weird nose with 22 fingers on it, by which it constructs a 3D model of its dark tunnels. And birds and cows and lots of insects have the ability to detect the magnetic field of the earth and navigate that way. These are all information sources that you can use and pick up on, and the brain will figure it out. My assertion is that once the principles of brain operation have been established by Mother Nature, she doesn't need to reinvent the brain every time. All she needs to do is tweak the genetics to build different sorts of sensors that are picking up on different kinds of information, and the brain will figure it out. And so the lesson that surfaces here is that eyes and ears and nose and all these things we're used to, this is just what we happen to have inherited from a long road of evolution. But it's not what we have to stick with. And our best proof of principle for that comes from what's called sensory substitution, which is where you feed information into the brain via unusual pathways, and the brain can figure it out, can figure out what to do with it. Now, that might sound speculative, but the first demonstration of this was in the journal Nature in 1969, where a scientist named Paul Bacchi-Rita put blind people in a modified dental chair, and there's this solenoid grid that pokes into their back. And so he set up a video camera, and he put something in front of the camera, and whatever is in front of the camera, you feel that poked into your back. So whether that's a triangle or a face or a circle or whatever, you feel that poked into your back. And blind people got really good at being able to tell what was in front of them visually just based on what they were feeling in the skin of their back, which is wild, right? And there are many different incarnations of this. So one of them is called the sonic glasses, where for blind people you have a camera, and whatever is being seen visually by the camera gets turned into an auditory stream. So it's, and blind people can get so good at this sort of thing that they can, learn how to navigate a complex obstacle course, things like that. And it doesn't have to be the ears. There was a group that did this with an electrotactile grid on the forehead. Why the forehead? Because you're not really using it for anything else. The most modern incarnation is an electrotactile grid that sits on the tongue. And so whatever the camera is seeing, you feel that on your tongue, these little shocks. It kind of feels like pop rocks in your mouth. And blind people get so good at this, they can do things like, throw a ball into a basket at a distance and actually operate this way. Now, if it seems completely crazy that you could come to, see through your tongue, just remember that it's equally bizarre that you come to see through these two spheres embedded in your skull that, convert photons into electrical patterns. It's the same kind of thing. Whatever the brain receives, it just figures out what to do with it. So one of the goals of my lab was to see if we could build sensory substitution for people who are deaf, so that something gets said and someone who's deaf understands what was said in the auditory world. And so we ended up building a vest that has vibratory motors in it, and it captures sound and turns the sound into patterns of vibration from low to high frequency. It breaks it up, which is exactly what your inner ear does. So I presented this at TED some years ago. Here's what it... So as I'm speaking, the sound is getting translated into dynamic patterns of vibration. I'm feeling the sonic world around me. So if you look here, you can sort of see how it looks. So on the left, she's saying the word sound. You can see it goes sound, and it's a touch. And you can see the different patterns. It's like being able to see what the inner ear is doing. Anyway, so she feels that on her skin. So we started testing this many years ago now. This was our very first participant, a gentleman named Jonathan, who was born profoundly deaf, which means there's a part of his umwelt that was unavailable to him. So we had him train with the vest a couple hours a day for 4 days. Here he is on his 5th day. This is my graduate student, Scott, on the right. So Scott will say a word. You. He says the word you. And then Jonathan feels his pattern of vibration and writes on the board what he thinks he's felt there.
Where?
So Scott says where. And Jonathan, translates this complicated pattern of vibrations on his vest into an understanding.
Touch.
Scott says touch. So, Jonathan's not doing this consciously because the patterns are too complicated, in exactly the same way that you're not using your cochlea consciously. You're not thinking, oh, Eagleman's saying some high and some low and some medium frequencies. You feel like you hear me. And that's exactly what happens here. So this was a gentleman that we had at our offices a little bit ago. National Geographic was out to film, but it wasn't because of him. It was because of his daughter, who was born deaf and blind. So we built a little miniature vest for her, and it's picking up on sound. So this was the first time she was able to hear the sounds of the world this way, to pick up on that. So here her grandmother is taking her around and touching her feet to things and saying, this is soft, this is hard, and so on. And on the right, it's a bed that's going up and down. So the grandmother's saying up, 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 down, down, down. And this is, of course, how you learn how to use your ears in the world, is by making correlations with other senses. That's how you figure it out. So in the interim, what we did is we shrunk this down to a wristband, which is what I'm wearing here. So the wristband is picking up on sounds, and it is a much more convenient form factor. And we're now on, wrists all over the world. This was, by the way, our very first participant some years ago, a gentleman named Philip, who was trying to. I'll just show this to you for a second so you get a sense of what it's like when you suddenly tap into the world of sound that you hadn't had before. So we're on wrists all over the world, and this is just a word cloud of things that people reported to us, of sounds they picked up on that in their being deaf, they had not known that these were sounds that were going on around them. And so it's been a really lovely thing to experience this. And so I just want to mention, one of the reasons this is important is because the only other option for somebody who's deaf is a cochlear implant, which is $100,000 and an invasive surgery. And our thing is, 100 times less expensive, and that's why we're all around the world and in deaf schools. The latest thing, which we just released, is a replacement for hearing aids. And the way it works is this listens in real time just for high-frequency phonemes, just the high-frequency parts of speech, and it buzzes and tells you, oh, I just heard an S, oh, I heard an F, I heard a TH, things like that. And so what happens is a person's ear, as people age, they get high-frequency hearing loss. The high frequencies is what they lose. So their ears are working fine at the medium and low frequencies, and this just picks up what's going on at the high frequencies, and your brain learns in about a week or two to fuse these signals. And so what we find is that the feedback people give on these subjective tests is better than hearing aids. And by the way, it doesn't have the social stigma that a lot of people worry about with wearing hearing aids, because it just looks like a Fitbit. We're running experiments now at Stanford and at Wake Forest with balance. So we just built a little collar clip. And so if somebody has a balance problem and they tilt and they get off axis, we have a 9-axis motion detector in there, it talks to the wristband, and so you know which direction and by how much you're tilting. So we're running those tests now. We've also been doing this with prosthetics. So it turns out that when people get a prosthetic leg, they have a hard time learning how to walk because they don't get any feeling from it. And so what we did is we hooked pressure and angle sensors into the prosthetic, and we feed that into the vest or the wristband. And so somebody with a prosthetic can feel what their new leg is telling them, just like you feel with your normal leg. And so that works super well in terms of giving someone immediate feedback about that. So we've got 70 different projects going on in the lab. One of them is, with robotic surgery, instead of having to monitor, look at all the monitors all the time, just being able to feel what's going on with the patient's vitals, being able to feel that while you're doing the surgery is one thing we're doing. We are doing things with artificial smell. So instead of needing a dog to do the smelling for you, you can have artificial molecular detectors that take care of this and feed you all these smells, and you just feel it. And we've actually got lots of other projects going on in terms of, feeling real-time streams of data from the internet, or feeling a drone when you're flying it around, and so on. But I just want to zoom in on one thing, which is feeling the spatial extent around you. So one of the things we're doing for the military now is reducing friendly fire, where you can feel where your colleagues are around you, even if you can't see them. So I can feel, okay, yeah, Bob's over there, and Tim's on the other side of of that wall over there and whatever, even though I can't see them. So this reduces the the possibility of accidents of shooting your own forces. And so it just so happens that I'm there was until this went out, but I was a scientific advisor for Westworld. And so one of the things I did is I put the vest in that show. So now I call it Vestworld, which sounds Yiddish, but anyway, I don't know if anyone saw season 2, episode 7, but these guys drop in, so that's the vest. But if you look at the guy in the center here, he's wearing the vest and it's lighting up and so on. But the point is, what he's doing is he's feeling where the bad robots are, the hosts, and so he is able to take care of them accordingly because he can feel their location. And so, this is just a different scene here where they weren't expecting any hosts there, but then they feel it and then they get killed, which goes to show you that if AI goes bad, my vest isn't going to help you at all. But what we did do, though, is take this idea and we use this for people who are blind. So we're using LiDAR to know the location of everything going on in the offices. And this is a blind gentleman who can feel, oh, there's somebody coming up on my left. Oh, they're moving behind me now. What we added on top here, what you're seeing, is we added navigation on top of that so that it says, OK, go straight. Oh, now turn left. Oh, now go to the right. And by the way, what we're doing here is steering him to a 45-degree conference room and seeing if he can, do that, which he can easily find, and so on. So anyway, this is part of what we're doing. So I just want to wrap by saying there's really no end in sight in terms of the kind of senses you can add. So one thing I want you guys to do is think about what would be things that you would want to add, being able to detect the state of your microbiome or feel your blood pressure or feel something about your EEG or states of our body that are normally totally invisible to us can be detected and perceived. And so the bottom line is we don't really have to wait for Mother Nature anymore in terms of, for her sensory gifts on her timescales, because what she's given us, like any good parent, is the cognitive ability to go out there and define our own trajectory. And so the question for us all to think about is, how do you want to experience your universe? Thank you very much.
Incredible work. How long does it take to rewire your brain using some of these things and other technologies that can accelerate that?
Yeah, well, so when it comes to spatial extent, like for the blind people, it's instant. So that's something that we just have an immediate sense of. Other things like learning to hear takes a few weeks. And as far as technologies to accelerate it, there are all kinds of possibilities for things that increase plasticity, like transcranial magnetic stimulation. We haven't tried those in combination yet, but I think that's the next step for us.
And sometimes it means ultrasound can now provide sense. Can it be built into our cars, into our car seats, other environments to give you sensing?
Yeah, exactly. We've actually built car seats for Toyota now, where you can feel, there's silly stuff like you feel the radio broken up into all its frequencies, which is super cool. And in fact, when people turn off the seat, they say the music feels thin after that. But it can also tell you lots of other things, like there's somebody coming up in your blind spot, and you can feel them coming up, and you can feel where the rest of the traffic is.
So next year's Sacred Cacao ceremony, we're going to integrate this technology, and it'll get even more trippy.
Excellent.
All right, thank you, David.
All right, thanks, Daniel.
All right.